everyone, to a very special episode of Home Base Hope. I know today's episode will resonate with you in so many ways because today we are exploring sensory processing, what it is, how it can affect your child, and strategies you can put in place today. Sensory processing can be a huge piece of the autism puzzle, and when you can understand why certain behaviours may be occurring, instead of reacting to the behaviour, you can bring a sense of understanding, you can offer strategies, and you can learn to appreciate the difference. Sensory processing can affect so many children in so many ways. Your child may be a fussy eater. Maybe they avoid brushing their teeth, wearing socks, or cutting their fingernails. They may not respond to their name, or maybe they're just a really floppy and clumsy child. Maybe your child stims. These are all clues that something is going on with the way your child processes incoming sensory information. Our guest today that I have the privilege to talking to has a profound influence on my professional career as an OT and also personally as a mother to 2 young children. I'm absolutely thrilled and honoured to have Carol Stock Kranowitz join me today. Carol has observed many children with sensory processing disorder and mild autism during her 25-year career as a preschool teacher. To help them become more competent in their work and their play, she studied sensory processing and sensory integration theory. Today, Carol speaks internationally about sensory processing disorders, effects on children's learning and behaviour, and how families, teachers and therapists can recognise and support children with sensory processing issues. In her first book, the award-winning Sync series, The Out of Sync Child, Recognising and Coping with Sensory Processing Disorder, it has sold over 1 million copies. It was selected by the Brainchild magazine as one of the top 10 books about children with disabilities. Carol's latest book is The Out of Sync Child Grows Up, Coping with Sensory Processing Disorder in the Adolescent and Young Adult Years. Carol is a board member of the STAR Institute for Sensory Processing Disorder. She lives in the US, she plays the cello, and she dotes on 5 sensational grandchildren. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you, Rhiannon. I'm glad to be here across the world.
It is. It's amazing what we can do these days, isn't it?
Yes, it is astonishing. There you are in your spring clothes, and I'm dressing for winter.
That's it. Well, it is such a privilege to have you on the show today. I'd love to start by rewinding the clock a little bit, and I'd love to know your why. What led you to becoming so passionate about helping children in the area of sensory processing?
I started teaching without teaching experience. I started at a neighborhood preschool, and we teachers were moms, not credentialed teachers. This was in the old days when that was possible. So I came without any understanding of atypical behavior. My own 2 children were typically developing kids. And so I got to this school, and I was the movement, music, and drama teacher there. And there were some children who were out of sync with the others. For instance, I would bring out a basket of alluring rhythm band instruments, and instead of examining them and selecting a triangle or a tambourine, a child might come and upturn the basket and strew the instruments all over the floor and walk through them. What was that behavior? Or I would put on a record with, this was in the days of records, tiptoeing music, and the child would march. I'd put on marching music. He would tiptoe. Or children constantly complaining about the tags in their shirts, the seams in their socks, the crunchiness of a pretzel. And children were so clever. I remember hearing children say, "My mother told me never to eat a saltine." And, you don't dispute what a child is taught at home. Maybe there was some religious reason not to eat a saltine. And, well, it was because it was crunchy, and this particular little child only ate applesauce and yogurt. nothing crunchy because of tactile issues. So I'm giving you a long answer. I'll cut it short. I was seeing children who were not just enjoying childhood and trying things and reaching for toys that other children found very interesting and engaging. These were children who would pull away from childhood experiences, or perhaps the opposite, engage in an unusual, wildly enthusiastic way that didn't seem to make sense. What was going on? How could I reach them? How could I become a better teacher? So after 10 years of wondering, an occupational therapist came to our school in Washington, D.C., did a short 90-minute workshop on what was then called sensory integration dysfunction. And it just made me understand this is what I was put on earth to learn about and to explain. I began to see all the patterns, and I'm happy that I've been able to help other people understand some of the characteristics and the solutions to sensory processing disorder.
Oh, you absolutely have. Like I said, I recommend your book to so many of the parents that I see for children who have challenges with sensory processing issues. It's so thorough, and it provides such a good overview of what sensory processing is, what to look out for, what are the red flags, and all the practical solutions. So thank you so much for that, because it is such a wonderful resource. Yeah, so as you said, it can impact so much on behaviour, and I suppose behaviour is the tip of the iceberg. That is what the parents will see and what they'll notice, but we need to start to uncover what's actually going on here. And sensory processing is a huge topic, and I'm sure we could talk about it for days. But,
yes.
But I think it's really essential that we start at the basics. So parents would know about the 5 main senses. So that's our sense of smell, touch, taste, hearing, and vision. But they might not be aware that we actually have 8 senses. And I didn't know this until I went to university. You only learn about the 5 main senses at school. So we actually have 8 senses, and the 3 other senses, they're actually invisible. And I'd love you to be able to talk about what these senses are and their importance.
Excellent. The 5 that you mentioned, Rhiannon, are sometimes called external or environmental senses, and I think of them as public senses also, because we see a squirrel run up a tree. Well, everybody can see that squirrel run up a tree. Everybody can feel that the fire is hot, but the 3 invisible ones are private. So one of them is the interoceptive system. And this is interoception is our mostly unconscious awareness of our internal organs. So we don't know what our spleen is doing or our gallbladder. We might know what our heart is doing, that our heart's beating fast, or that we're sweating, or that we're hungry, or that we need to urinate. We might have the kind of awareness that we need so we can function, but interoception governs everything and keeps us, it's the behind the scenes operation, and it has to be going well. And nobody else knows. You don't know whether I have to go to the bathroom, and I learned not to tell you. And many children don't know that. So that's why we have a lot of children with sensory processing disorder who have toileting issues. They don't know that they have to have a bowel movement, for instance. They don't know that they're hungry. And so we wonder, why are they so cranky? Why is this child having a meltdown? And he doesn't know. He can't say. Proprioception is another one of these invisible or personal sensory systems. That is the awareness of our muscles and joints and what our limbs and body parts are doing. So playing Simon Says, for instance, requires a child to know what to do. If the leader says, Simon Says, do this, the child has to be able to copy that. And the leader might say, Simon says do the same thing with the other hand. Well, if you don't have good proprioception, you don't know what to do. I tell people that I bet they have good proprioception if they can get dressed in a dark closet. And if you can picture, you'll have to grope, you'll have to feel where the sleeves are and where the zipper is and everything. But most of us could do that. We could get into our sneakers and tie our shoelaces probably in the dark if we've done it enough times. If that seems hard for you, parents and teachers who are listening, you might need a mirror to help you get dressed. And that might indicate that your proprioception is a little off. Getting dressed is a good example of proprioception. Using the appropriate amount of force for opening a buckle or pouring juice or slamming the car door, or how to put your foot appropriately on the tread of the stairs. All of that force is like grading of movement. After many, many, many gazillions of experiences as we mature, we're learning just how much pressure to put on how to turn the light on or off.
Yeah, I know. Even like if you go to pick up a glass, for example, and you can't see how much water is in the glass, it's opaque or something, and you pick it up and you might expect that it's really heavy, and so you'll go to lift it up with that expectation, and if there's nothing in it, you might sort of fling it behind you because you're using that much.
Exactly.
Yeah. So kids
exactly. So there's a great deal of clumsiness that results from poor proprioception. And can a little kid say, Mommy, the muscles and joints in my elbow and my shoulder are not giving me the correct feedback, and so that's why I can't put my arm into the jacket that you're holding for me, and don't get mad at me. I mean, the kid could say, don't get mad at me, but he can't say why. All right. So proprioception is also very important for changing our position. Say there's an obstacle course on the playground. A child with proprioception issues will have difficulty standing up now, crouching now, balancing now, climbing and sliding. All of those changes in position will be quite demanding. The third invisible private sense is the vestibular sense. And Dr. Jean Ayres, who was the occupational therapist who formulated the theory of sensory processing in the middle of the last century, Dr. Ayres called the vestibular sense our master sense. This is it happens in our inner ear. Gravity tells us where we are in space, particularly where our head is in space. So, are we walking around like this? Our vestibular sense should be telling us that. Are we falling down? Are we on a swing? Are we turning around? Are we on the bus that's stationary next to the bus that's moving? Or is our bus moving? Our vestibular sense tells us all of this. And Dr. Ayres went on and she said, our security of being grounded is absolutely paramount. We need that knowledge, that certainty that we are on Earth, or else we feel as if we could just get blown away, poof, off the face of the earth. So, when we're little and we're learning to walk, and our vestibular sense is new, we're hanging on to the furniture and to mommy's hand. As we mature, we learn how to run up the stairs, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, instead of left, right, left, right, left, right. We learn to get on the swing and love the swing and love jumping off the swing and love turning in circles and getting dizzy, because it's fun to kind of defy gravity. That's if our vestibular sense is working well. But picture the children whom you might love and not understand, who are very tentative as they move. And you think, why is that kid holding onto the banister so tightly? What's so scary about getting on a tricycle? Well, if your vestibular system is not working, everything is scary about moving. So, you ask me questions and I get excited about all these topics. You might have to put up a little time sign.
No, it's great. No, I think it's so important, and I think that's the basics. I think parents need to understand what our senses are, what the importance is, so they can relate it to their child and have that practical understanding of how, not having that sense of security in the world. If they're having challenges riding their bike, for example, because our vestibular sense is very closely linked to balance and our core strength. So if they're having challenges with riding a bike, if they fear going up high or going in a lift or going on the swing, like you said, or even movements that go round and round, so spinning movements at the playground, if they're fearful of anything like that, it's worth looking into providing them and grading slowly more opportunities for movement to help develop this vestibular sense.
That's the take-home message I'm going to want everybody to have. Going outside and having experiences outside, whole body experiences. As I looked over the questions that you sent me in advance, Rhiannon, I kept coming up with the same answer: what to do for children. And shall we look at those questions?
Let's dive in. Okay. Let's dive in. So before we get to that, I do want to touch on. So we know the senses now, but parents will be asking, okay, what actually is sensory processing and what is sensory processing disorder? What is it? And can you give us an overview of that?
Sensory processing is a normal, everyday neurological process that we don't even think about. We have these 8 senses. We have receptors all over our body. Most of them are in our head. The touch system is our largest sensory system geographically because we have skin all over our body. But the vestibular sense, the apparatus is in the inner ear, and the nostrils and the eyes and the mouth for tasting and the ears for hearing. Most of it's up here in the head. So we get sensations from our own body, movement and activity, and from our environment. The playground, the kitchen, the office, the street corner. And these sensations of movement, like a truck passing by, is giving us sensations of that we can see, hear, maybe smell if it's, a smelly truck. Maybe the ground is rumbling a little bit from the weight of it going past us. We're getting all those sensations. They come in very rapidly into our central nervous system, which is our spine, our brainstem, and our brain. And the nervous system says, aha, truck coming near, don't get in its way. And we learn how to hang back on the curb rather than running out in front of the truck and becoming a piece of toast. So our senses are, the primary use of our senses is to keep us alive. So we need to get that information from our bodies, from our environment to survive, to make appropriate responses. And those are called adaptive responses. So let's put you in your imagination on the stairs. You're going upstairs in an old house. You haven't been in this house before. You see the stairs. You know how to make your legs move. Oh, but one of those stairs has a higher rise than the others, and you see it too late, and you stub your toe a little bit. So you make an adaptive response. You are more careful now going up this funny staircase. Coming down, you'll probably remember that tall step and be careful about it. And that's how we get through our day. We have obstacles all around us every day, and without too much prefrontal cortex attention, we can get through our day all right, pretty well, because our senses are running smoothly. Sensory processing disorder is when all those sensations are coming in, just like everybody gets the sensations coming in. There's nothing tangled or mangled about receptors, but it's in the that nanosecond after the sensations come in, as I understand it, that the confusion begins. Maybe the sensations get derailed. They don't meet up where they're supposed to, or maybe they're a little stodgy. They go a little slowly. Well, we can't afford that when the truck is coming down the street and we're about to step off the curb. But you might have noticed some children will know the answer to a question, but it's like beat, beat, beat. Oh, I know, the answer is Sydney. The answer is Washington, D.C. But it takes them a little bit longer to get the question in, process it, and give you the answer. These are the kids that get squashed at school. The teacher doesn't have time. Mm-hmm. The other children say, I know. It's very frustrating if your processing is a little slower for school. But basically for life, if your processing is tangled up, that it's going to interfere with your coordination, your responses to all kinds of situations, your relationships with people, your reading, your writing, your eating, your sleeping, sensory processing. Dr. Ayers called it a traffic jam in the brain. And imagine that all the time that you're dealing with.
Yeah, that's a very comprehensive, wonderul explanation. And I think the important thing for parents to remember is that everyone has sensory information that they need to process, and everyone processes it in a different way. We will all respond to the same sensory experience, whether it's the truck coming down the road, whether it's brushing the teeth or brushing the hair. It's the same sensory experience, but everyone will process that information very differently, and therefore their response will be very different. So and I think it becomes a problem when it starts to impact on day-to-day life.
Yes. So we all have sensory issues. I, for instance, don't like baking bread or finger paint or Play-Doh. So when I was a preschool teacher, for a while I was in the classroom, and the parents complained to the head of the school that the children didn't come with any art in their art bags on Friday afternoon. And the head of the school said, that's messy stuff, which is very important in preschool. It's clear that's not your thing, Carol. But the movement and the music and the other thing, big whole body play and lots of rhythm and chants.
That's right. Yeah, so it's so important to be mindful of that even parents will have their own sensitivities to certain experiences. That's excellent. Right. Awesome. Right. Let's head to... Yes.
I just want to make one more thing. Just because I have tactile over responsivity, and you won't see me playing in the bread dough, that does not mean I have sensory processing disorder. That means that's my little specialty. Sensory that tactile thing. I can certainly live without baking bread. We use the term sensory processing disorder when the sensory systems, one of them or three of them or eight of them, are so troublesome for the child that the child's life is impacted, and it's really hard to function and to enjoy life. So that's when we say SPD. But you guys listening, if bright lights bother you, that's a sensory issue, but we wouldn't say you had SPD.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. That's good clarification. And it's important to realise too that SPD isn't actually an official diagnosis at the moment, is it? It's just a description. So, that's important to keep in mind, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah.
It's real. It's real, all right, but it hasn't been accepted in the final
DSM-5 or anything like that.
Fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's head to stimming, because a lot of children on the spectrum will engage in what's called stimming or self-stimulatory behaviours. Are you able to talk us through what stimming is as it relates to self-regulation and what it might look like?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can because I'm not that familiar with kids with autism. Many kids with SPD do not stim. I think most children with autism do. So I will only say that when you see children doing something like this, it might be organizing for them. It might also be, if they're doing this close to their eyes, it might be helping them see what's here in their peripheral vision close up and not the whole world out there, which might be very confusing. And I'll stop there, because I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's exactly right. Children with autism, a lot of the times will engage in these stimming behaviours. So they might flap their hands, they might walk on their toes. I've got children that I see that just constantly spin in circles or body rock. So they'll slam their back into their lounge room chair. And this can be very calming and soothing and organises their nervous system. So it is. It works in the same way. They're seeking or they're using their sensory system to calm and organise or seek certain experiences that, does organise their nervous system so they can become available and ready for learning. So, let's dive into sensory processing disorder, because it is a massive umbrella term, and there are 3 types of sensory processing disorder. There's what's called sensory modulation disorder, sensory discrimination disorder, and sensory-based motor disorder. And as an OT working with children on the spectrum, I see loads of challenges with the sensory modulation. So, and quite often parents will refer to sensory processing disorder, and they're referring to sensory modulation disorder. So when the child's volume control on their senses is turned up way too much and they're extremely oversensitive to everything, or it's turned down so much that they're just not noticing the world around them. So this is where I wanted to focus most of our attention today, because I know parents will have so many questions answered if we can delve into sensory modulation a little bit further.
And I want people to remember, I am not an OT. I am an OT wannabe, but I'm not
you have a wealth of knowledge, Carol.
I've learned a lot from wonderful occupational therapists. All right, so modulation issues are the most common, and as we were just saying, everybody has some modulation issues, especially when we're sick or tired or pregnant, or when something's big is going on physically. But then we get over it, most of us. Okay, but for children who have SPD with the modulation issues, when they are over responsive or oversensitive, These are the kids I call the avoiders. It might be noise. It's often, more oftener than anything, it's touch that bothers these children, as I understand it. They are out of sync with what they touch and what touches them. So an example might be you're sitting at the dining room table, and sister wiggles in her seat, and her leg gets over toward Billy's area, and he freaks out, and he says, "She's trying to kick me. She's trying to hurt me. She's always trying to hurt me." Her foot just grazed the child's foot, but he cannot interpret that as a benign, a temporary situation. It's like the world is coming to an end. So anything that most people could shrug off or ignore, if it's a tactile or touch issue, it might be tremendous to a person who's oversensitive to touch. It could be that the child is very oversensitive to movement. That would be the vestibular system. That is the child's specialty. That is the child his feet will never leave the ground. He hates the playground. He goes because you drag him, because you know that's a good place to be, and you are right. Even if he doesn't like it, please, I want you to take him there anyway. And find things to do where his feet don't have to leave the ground for a while until he's ready. This is the child who sees an obstacle course or, let's say, a curb, and brothers and sisters and neighborhood friends are all walking on the curb and balancing and having fun, and he won't do that. What might work for that child is to take a board and put it on the grass and have him practice walking on the board. If that's not great, keep working on it. Put it on the floor instead of the grass. If that's still not great, get some masking tape. Take some tape and make a strip of that flat on the floor, because it might turn out that the child has a visual issue as well as vestibular. So it's not just being up off the ground, but it's also making sense of space in front of him. That's all entwined with the vestibular system. So that the avoider doesn't want to touch and or doesn't want to move and or doesn't want to be touched and or moved.
What about oh, sorry.
Go, did you want to
I was just going to say, what about the auditory sense? Because many children on the spectrum will be very oversensitive to certain noises. What might that look like, and what can parents do about that?
Okay. The reason I stress the touch and the movement is that those are the biggies, the way I understand it. So you could have an auditory problem and it might not be considered SPD per se. But of course it is implicated if you have movement issues. The vestibular system and the auditory system are very closely involved. So if your feet don't leave the ground, chances are you also have an auditory problem. Mm-hmm. Okay. So loud noises will bother this child, this over-responsive child. And it's not just the slamming door. A door slams for us. We turn. Is it a threat? Is it something we need to pay attention to? We'll look up from our book. Oh, it was the wind. Okay, back to the book. For Billy, who has SPD, oh no, that slamming door. Oh no, I have to calm down. Billy's saying he's trying to figure out how he can calm down. It's very hard for him to calm down. And then he realizes the tag in his shirt is bothering him. Oh no, now it's really getting bad. Oh no, oh no. The teacher says, get out the math book, and he always has trouble reaching in his desk for the math book because it feels so much like the spelling book. and the other kids are pulling out their books, and he can't tell from reaching in his desk without looking at it and thinking about it which one is his. Oh no, oh no, oh no. So for kids who are oversensitive, the oversensitivity, this sensory modulation issue, is enormous. These reactions to life out there they come fast and furiously and frequently. Door slams, door slams, door slams. Each one is a new disaster. The intensity of the child's reaction is very strong. The duration of his response is very long. He's going to remember that slamming door. Well, another example is a splinter. Kids get splinters. Okay, grandma takes it out with her special splinter needle. All right, and life goes on. Not so for Billy. He's going to remember that splinter. And he got that splinter in March, and he's going to remember it in September. Mm. So the intensity and the duration of this sensory insult goes on and on. And also, I want to say that over-responsive children's reactions are make them very emotional. They're highly emotional children, and we say, "Oh, he's very touchy," or "Oh, he's very sensitive," or "Yeah, he is, and he's not doing it on purpose." So
that's it. I think parents need to understand that it is something neurological that is going on. There is a reason why they are behaving like this and overreacting. And it can present, they're usually the children that have the big meltdowns, aren't they? They could be hitting, yes, biting, kicking, punching, screaming, and it could go on. Parents will say they do that for hours and they just can't calm themselves down. And it's because that experience was so real, as you were saying, it's real to them, and it's so, yes, deeply irritating. And I suppose if we liken it to ourselves, if someone imposed a certain sensory experience on us that we don't like, so if I made you knead that bread dough and do all these things that you don't like, if it causes enough pain, I suppose, you are going to respond in a certain way. I know if someone made me eat a tin of tuna and oysters, I would not be too pleased at all, and so I suppose we've got to remember that everyone, again, has our own experience, and how that child is experiencing their world is real, and we need to respect that. We need to respect where they are coming from and try and understand it.
Yes, and we're going to talk about some of the other modulation issues too. And for children who present with other types, with all types of sensory processing, I suggest that we put on our imaginary sensory goggles and put on these goggles and look at children and ask ourselves two questions. One is there something sensory going on here that is causing my child to have this response? Or a harder question to answer is there a sensation that my child is not receiving that would help him? And that is true when when we look at school life and actually home life. In these days, in the year 2017, our children are indoors almost all the time. And nature has designed us to be outside, foraging for food and finding rocks and sticks and mud to make our shelter. Don't ask me to put the mud there, but I'll get the rocks for you. But we're designed to be very busy surviving, using our senses to learn about our environment and what's my place in this world, and how can I help my family and my tribe and make this a secure, safe place. not indoors. That's not what we're designed to do. So with our sensory goggles on, we can say, this little kid has not had recess today. No wonder she's squirming all over her chair. And I remember I was in a grocery store recently, and I was behind a woman who had a mound of groceries. She had been in the store for a long time collecting food, and her little child was in the seat, and he was rocking back and forth, and, oh, mommy, let's get out of here. And she said, just a few more minutes, we're almost done, and we'll just go home and put the ice cream away, and then we'll go right to the playground. Just be patient a little longer. And this child hollers all for the whole grocery store to hear, Mommy, you are patienting me to death. And that's our life. I know parents can't spend 24 hours outdoors all the time with their kids, but it's so important to get them out more.
I couldn't agree more.
So let's go on and talk a little bit about the under-responsive child, because that's harder to see. The over-responsive child is making it clear how unhappy he is with touches and movements and noises and smells and life. Mm-hmm. This is a child who wants to live under the table. The other...
I was just going to say just a few strategies. So for the children who want to live under the table and they're in that fight, flight or freeze mode, they're in that survival mode because they're waiting for that next sensory hit to come along and disrupt them and disorganize their brain and their body. I suppose some strategies in terms of parents just respecting that it's real and initially avoiding that unpleasant stimulus, but slowly increasing it so it's in a safe environment and they can start to slowly tolerate it, because they don't want to avoid it forever, because we can't live life under the table.
Yeah, that's right. And you and I are definitely in sync. We want children at the table. And a tendency is to say, oh, my little Carol doesn't like finger painting. I'm not going to torture her and make her miserable. She can read a book. She likes books. Well, no, little Carol needs to come to the table. And little Carol can enjoy the finger painting with slowly getting her into it. And here are some ideas. Take the finger paint and put it into a Ziploc plastic bag. And the child can poke at it and smear it and trace with her fingers and get some satisfaction that way. Or put it down on a cafeteria tray and give the child vinyl gloves, or just cut the fingers off a grown-up's vinyl glove and let the child have one little covering for a finger and let her do it that way. Or give her a tool to use, a toothpick, a popsicle stick, a spoon, or something to give her a little distance from it. But don't let her get away. She's got to be at the table. And that sounds really, really stern. I don't mean that. I don't mean, darn it, you're going to be here at the table. But what you said, Rhiannon, and Rhiannon, did I get it right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Incrementally, little steps, closer and closer until the child is comfortable doing something. Eating is an example. A lot of children with tactile over-responsivity won't put anything but a few very comfortable foods into their mouths. Some children with this condition are like things crunchy. It has to be crunchy. They have to really be able to feel it in their mouths. Carrots and bacon and pretzels, but no applesauce, no yogurt. Then there is the creamy diet that's all yogurt, all milk, all ice cream, and nothing with texture. Heaven forbid there's any pulp in the orange juice, for instance. These children will have a meltdown or something like that. So gradually what you do to get them to broaden their diet is to say, all right, today we're going to put broccoli on the table. It's just going to be on the table. And the next week, a piece of broccoli, a little piece, is going to be on the child's plate. And the next week, the child is asked to touch it. And gradually, very slowly, this doesn't happen overnight, gradually you have the child bring it to his mouth, kiss it, maybe put it in his mouth for an instant.
Smell it.
Leave it. Smell it. All right.
Use all the senses. I think because obviously the mouth is a very sensitive place, and if you can't even tolerate smelling it or, like you said, looking at it or touching it, there's no way you're going to put it in that very vulnerable place like your mouth. There's no chance.
Exactly. So we want to bring children to the table, and we want to do it incrementally and just a short time, as calmly as possible. Today, we're going to go to the playground. And, in 3 months, we're going to get on the swing, but we're going to get closer and closer to the swing. And and this is what an OT would do in her well-regulated clinic. She would take the child and gradually get the child to get on suspended equipment so the child is off the ground, but very, very close to the ground, and then gradually raise the platform so the child's further away. So we can do a little bit of that in our life and with our own children too. Exactly. But golly, those goggles make all the difference. When you put the goggles on and you say, the first thing you say is, it's not me, it's not my fault as a mom. I haven't been doing something wrong. I can see my child has a neurological issue with things that don't bother me, but I respect that they bother her. And boy, that just makes a huge difference.
Awesome. Absolutely. I think that's, I think parents are going to be really tuning in here, because I think that will be so true of so many of their kids. And now, they can start to develop that better understanding of what they can do and how to use these sensory goggles to see what is actually going on. So they're the sensory sensory oversensitive. So they're overreacting to all the sensory experiences. What does it look like for children who are undersensitive to sensory information?
These children seem kind of out of it. Self-absorbed. They don't really notice what's going on around them. They can notice it. Again, there's nothing damaged with their sensory receptors, but it's just they don't have that. They don't have a typical way of responding. So with these kids, they will come alive. You can turn their ignition with more intense, vigorous sensory input than you would give to more typical children. Let's see, like I would say, for an over-responsive infant, don't jiggle the baby. That baby is, I see parents jiggling their baby hoping it's going to help. It would perhaps help the under-responsive child, but don't do that to an over-responsive child. So take your under-responsive child and let him, if he's little, let him sit on the dryer while the dryer's spinning. And that might be kind of stimulating for him. Give him granola and crunchy celery and food to chew on. Give him chewing gum. Even young children, like a 3-year-old, certainly can chew gum, and if he swallows it, it's no big deal. It goes right through. And that chewing is really good for the mouth, and there's so many proprioceptors here around the jaw and the mouth. At bath time, give the under-responsive child loofah sponges, terry cloth, washcloths with different textures of terry cloth, kitchen scrub brushes like Teflon, the hard foamy scrubbers. Make a basket of interesting things that the child can take in the bathtub with them. And by the way, that's a perfectly great idea for the over-responsive child too, to get him to learn how to handle different textures on his skin. What's good for one might be good for all when we're talking about some of these suggestions. So the under-responsive child does well with the volume turned up a little bit. We had a child at our nursery school who was very under-responsive, and the occupational therapist who was our consultant for kids like him, this little lad had autism. She said to raise our voices to him, and we teachers were gentle and kind and calm, and this was unusual for us, but we would open the car door when his parents would drive by to drop him off at school, and we would yell at him. Say, "Good morning, Robbie. It's so wonderful to see you today." I mean, blaring it into the child's face. And he would smile. And it was unnatural for us teachers, but that was what we needed. We'd help him out of the car. We'd say, do you want a bear hug this morning? And he would nod. And we would squeeze the bejeepers out of him, like his ribs were going to be crushed. And we'd squeeze, and he loved it. Do you want to be upside down? Yes. And we would upside down him and yell at him.
Yeah, I think when you said about the auditory processing, so you were yelling at him. A lot of times children on the spectrum will get hearing tests, and their hearing will come back perfectly fine, but parents can't understand why their child isn't turning when their name is called. So they'll say, "Billy, Billy," and he won't look at mum or he won't look at dad. And it's not the fact that he's got a hearing problem, it's the fact that he's undersensitive or under-responsive to this information.
Exactly. Right. So that's why a lot of kids fall through the cracks when they're screened at school. And I don't know, I imagine this is true in Australia. In the United States, children are screened by vision people who come in to test their eyesight and their hearing. And so for hearing, they'll get earphones. Is that true? You have that happen at school?
I'm not sure if we have it at schools, but we can go and get it privately done.
Or sometimes pediatricians will do it in their offices too. And the child is asked, "Can you hear the little birdie?" And inside the earphones, there will be a little tweet, tweet. The typical child will say, "I hear it." The atypical child who has sensory processing disorder, there's that beat, beat, beat. Yes, he hears it. And then it's going somewhere in the brain, and then the child understands he's heard it, and then he says, "I hear it." Okay, that child will pass the hearing test, but it's a red flag that the auditory information that is all around us is taking longer to get processed. And that's the child who's going to fall through the cracks. And that's the child who will benefit from something like occupational therapy. Even if you, Rhiannon, don't particularly treat the ears, you might be treating the whole body. You might have the child jumping on a trampoline or swinging or something. The whole body is going to work together to get the hearing improved also.
Can you tell us how that works? Because that might sound very confusing to parents, to jump on a trampoline to get the hearing to work. How does that work? They're like, what's going on here? This sounds crazy.
It does sound crazy. No, I know. We have these 8 senses, and they are integrated. So imagine that truck going down the street again. We have a lot of senses that are telling us that truck is coming close to us. Thank goodness we have them all, because we need them all. That multisensory input is very important. And research is showing that when you test to see if a child hears something, and then so there's a little beep, 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 and then you might put little puffs of air on a child's hand, and you can see it on a printout because the child's all wired up. Then, all right, so let's say the child hears, all right, and so you see the child hearing in a line, and then you see the child's response to touches, and you see that moving along. Then you do both at the same time, the puff of air and the hearing, and you see that the child's processing of incoming sensory messages is sharper, clearer, faster, better, more useful. So the more we get in through all our senses, the more we are getting muscles responding, hearing responding, eyesight responding. Jumping is great for the brain, and for reading, and for listening. And here's a wonderful story. Across the street from the preschool where I taught all those years is the elementary school. So children would leave St. Columba's nursery school, and they would go across the street to the school. And one day I met the kindergarten teacher at that school over there, and she said, I always mean to ask you teachers at nursery school, how much time do you devote to cutting every day? Because when I get kids who are graduates of the preschool, they are fabulous cutters. And I love that question, because my answer was, the children learn to cut by playing on the playground, by sliding, digging, climbing, swinging, jumping, running. It's the large muscle activity that our little kids are desperately in need of, that prepares them to sit quietly in elementary school and read and cut and pay attention to directions. So the larger lesson here is that first thing is the large muscles. They're called the proximal muscles. They're trunk muscles. First, we have to get our kids to have good core strength and being upright and moving in a centered, upward, outward way. And then that's like the main highway, the proximal muscles. When those are working well, and this is all vestibular, all proprioceptive, all tactile, it's all these basic senses. When the proximal muscles work well, then they lend a support for the fine motor skills, which are cutting, speaking, using your eyeballs, and I know that many children don't need to do this, but picking up marbles with their toes.
I think you're spot on. It's so true. I mean, there's no way we can expect a child to have excellent control of their pen if they're floppy like a noodle in the middle and they can't even sit on a chair properly. So they need, like you said, those core foundational skills and build up the muscle tone and everything like that by getting them outside. I mean, movement is food for the brain. Our kids need to move, and I think I know you're very passionate about getting kids outside and more natural outdoor environments because kids these days do live a very sedentary lifestyle. They're sitting in front of the TV, they're playing their computer games, you know, they need to be out there just working on the foundations. And when they are out there having fun, they are simultaneously building on all these sensory systems that help them do the inside work, the tabletop desk work that they need to do at school.
Absolutely. I'm so firmly, it's not just a belief, it's a certainty that movement is learning. And when we have our kids outside, they're not missing out by being outside. They are missing out by being inside and having computers and even books. And so, when I do a presentation, I ask a room full of people to think of an activity that they remember from childhood, some experience, and then share it with their neighbor. And the room is all abuzz, and people are excited about this. And it turns out that everybody remembers an outdoor experience. And I explain it. I say you remember it because it's sensory rich. Count up the sensory systems that were involved in climbing that apple tree, and you probably have 7. And if you ate an apple, then you have 8 senses involved. Since we don't eat a lot of stuff that we do, but and then I go on. I say, did anyone think of a classroom experience? Silence. Did anybody remember a television experience? No. How about reading? And this is what's so interesting. Even reading, which could have been so pleasurable, is not the first or second or 10th childhood experience that people remember when they answer my question. What do you remember now about a pleasurable childhood experience? So the more our 8 senses are engaged, the more memorable and important and developing that experience is. So
that resonates with me so much. I know, like, how many senses do you engage when you watch the TV? 2. You can see it and you can hear it. But
you can even just look at static too. And I know older people will turn on the TV just to have it there when there's nothing that they can see and there's nothing that they can hear, and they're not using any of their senses. Yeah, TV doesn't do it.
Right.
Let's talk about the third kind of modulation problem, because I know that we did talk about over-responsivity, which is the most common and which can be affecting one sense or several senses. So when we are talking about modulation problems, there are these 3: the over-responsive child, the under-responsive child, and then there is the seeker or the craver. Actually, the craver, more than seeking, because we all seek sensations, but the craver never gets enough. And this is the little kid or the teenager or the adult who is addicted to some kind of sensation. It might be the child who wants to spin all the time, spin, and who gets off the rotary swing, which is intense vestibular activity. And the child might get off and might not be dizzy, and his eyes might be very clear and straight in his head, not going back and forth, which is what we expect in a typical nervous system. We expect dizziness. But the child who's the craver might get off that swing after half an hour of swinging and not be dizzy at all. That's a very clear sign that there is a vestibular irregularity going on. Or the child might want a lot of noise. If there isn't enough noise coming from the radio, he'll go over and turn up the volume. If he can't get the noise from the environment, he'll make the noise. He'll be always climbing, jumping. Everything is a ladder. The bookcase is a ladder. He'll go to the top of the jungle gym that other children know is just not a sensible place to go, and this kid is up there. Cravers also tend to eat a lot, not because they're hungry, but one reason might be that they just love that proprioception that they're getting from chewing. Give them gum. Remember, gum goes right through, and you don't have any problems with it if the kid swallows it. Now, what do we do, excuse me, with our seeker who's always jiggling and causing a ruckus and getting so much attention, which is often negative? Well, my answer for all modulation problems, well, actually for all sensory problems, whether it's modulation or something different, is get the kids outside. You can't be outside too much. There's always more to do and more to learn. And so with the craver, what might he be doing? He might be digging. Give him a shovel. Give him a chore to do. And then say to him, that is a wonderful ditch that you just planted there for the carrots. What would I do without a son like you? And imagine how that feels to the kid who is often getting the wrong kind of attention. I think
Absolutely.
Every child,
particularly in the classroom, I think you see those sort of sensory seeking behaviours, kids who are told to sit down and be still and concentrate, when really they need to be outside and moving, or they just need to almost fix that desire and that requirement to move first before they can even be available for learning. That's right.
If they have to get out there, get engaged to get the wheels in their brain working. And when we're outside or inside on a bad day, but laboring with a broom or a spoon or an iron or anything, trampoline, right. But when we're doing something with our bodies, the left and the right hemispheres of the brain are talking to each other, and that's what we need too, to get that back and forth, to help the senses be integrated and to work back and forth. I think real work is very important for children. I'll give you a couple of little tips I gave. Things I did with my kids when they were boys. I would have them jump on boxes like cereal boxes and paper, cardboard and milk cartons and egg cartons to flatten them for the recycling. And then I would give them the salad spinner, the spin around, just jobs so that they were feeling that, and if it was messy, I liked them to do the messy stuff, so I didn't have to do it. But, this was so much a part of what they did when they grew up, that when one of my sons went off to college, the younger one, when he went off to college, quite seriously, he said to me, "Mom, are you going to be okay with the salad spinner all by yourself?" I was so touched. It was so sweet because I had convinced him that I really was helpless without him. But anyway, he knows how to spin the salad.
Fantastic. That's it. It's just little jobs around the house, and same with school, because I think a lot of times parents have challenges with their children at school because it is so structured and routine in terms of sitting down, sitting at your desk, sitting on the mat, and they just want to be able to move their bodies more. So if they can run an errand to the library, take some heavy books to the library and come back, or do some push-ups on the wall, anything that gets
exactly, push-ups on the wall, or pressing their own hands together, or pressing on the desk, or moving furniture is great too, if your floors can stand it, and just have kids shove their desks around. Another idea is to make a walking path at the back of the room. You could call it a thinking path, or it's not a timeout. It's not, "Oh, you bad boy, you have to go there." It's a thoughtful thing a teacher can say to a kid. "I can see that you're kind of wiggly today. You can go to the walking path." And behind the heads of the other children, the child can just walk back and forth and get some get something going.
Yeah, some input. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Movement. And that's what I think has been the biggest message that I have gotten from you today is move the body, because that is what is going to integrate all the senses, and it's so very important, particularly in the world that we're living in today, where kids aren't simply moving it enough as what they should be. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Carol. I think we have covered the three main categories that come under that sensory modulation subcategory of sensory processing disorder. So we might head to the 5 rapid fire questions now.
Okay.
Excellent. So what is one habit our listeners can implement today?
One habit
that our listeners can implement today.
Go outside. Just how can I say it any it's so wonderful out there, and when the kids are out there, they'll have a wonderful time. At first they might not know what to do, but leave the devices in the house, just go outside.
Excellent. Lovely. What do people never ask you that you wish they did?
They never asked me about going outside. And this, I think this is generational too. I think our parents were certainly outside, and in my childhood, I was outside all the time, barefoot, stealing grapes from the neighbors, and playing hopscotch, and just that's where the fun was. But parents don't think of that. They'll ask me, do I know a good educational video for helping a child learn to count? And I'll say, instead of getting a video, give the child 3 oranges and a bucket. You can learn a lot of math.
Right? That's it. I think we look at educational apps as well on the iPad or the tablet as a very easy way to do the learning, when, like you were saying, if we can engage all the senses and we can make it multi-sensory experience, then they are more likely to have, they're going to make those new neural connections. And this is what is the foundation for future learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent. So other than your own amazing books that you have out there, which are absolute Bible, what are there any other books that you would recommend that our listeners can read?
Yes. The 2 that I go to frequently are Raising a Sensory Smart Child by Lindsay Beale and Nancy Pesky. Here. Yeah. And the other one is Lucy Jane Miller's Sensational Kids. And Lucy Jane Miller was one of Dr. Ayers' disciples. She was a fellow learning with Dr. Ayers in the 1970s. So Lucy Jane Miller is the queen. Yes. And your next question, I know, is what's in my bucket. I love that.
What is one of your top 3 unfinished bucket list items?
I have one more book in me. I've written a children's book called The Good Enoughs Get in Sync. It's about a family named The Good Enoughs, and each one of them has a different kind of sensory issue. And at the end of a very difficult day, they get it together, and they're outside a lot, and then they come together and get a good night's sleep. And I want to write a children's book about their terrible grandmother who just doesn't get it at all, and she scolds her kids for indulging the little ones, and what these children need is more discipline. And Granny comes to stay to babysit for a long weekend, and the power goes out, and everything confusing happens, and by the time the weekend is over, Granny is bouncing on the therapy ball, and she's pulling on stretchy ropes, and she's having a wonderful sensory motor workout and getting in sync. So that's in my bucket. Not much else, though. I've achieved a lot of.
Absolutely. Oh, that would be such a valuable book. That would be awesome. I cannot wait to get my hands on that.
Good.
What a great idea. What a great idea. And so the last question is, if you could only offer one piece of advice to parents, what would it be?
I think have fun. Life is serious, and when you're raising a child with challenges, whether those challenges have been diagnosed or not, we tend to be very serious and think hard about what is the next therapist to go to, or how do I manage this? Parenting, like childhood, is supposed to be filled with joys, and I'm positive that those joys are there for everybody if we're open to them. And play. Just be silly. Play with your food. One thing that a parent can do when the time changes is hand the child a big watch or a small clock that's set correctly and go around the house and change all the clocks in the house. Engage the child in carrying the laundry upstairs. Say things like, I would love to play Monopoly with you, and if you can help me with my chores, then I have 15 more minutes to start a game with you. Kids just sometimes need to be reminded they always need to be appreciated. And with our sensory goggles on, we can really see what's making them out of sync, and then we can help them get in sync.
Beautifully said. I think everyone will be whipping out their sensory goggles after listening to this podcast today. So I want to thank you so much, Carol, for helping parents and professionals like myself better understand sensory processing and sensory processing disorder. And in really practical terms, it's so valuable, and I can't wait to see your new books that's coming out. It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome, and enjoy your summer.
We
coming
will.
Up way over there.
There's no excuse not to get outside, is there?
That's right. That's right. Lovely.
Excellent. Thank you, Carol. Bye.
Bye-bye.